Between episode 23 and 24, there was a whole bunch of planning and preparations that the anime decided to skip out on, a lot of which went into scaling Naofumi's level of power for the next wave. What the anime failed to highlight was just how much Naofumi and the others had leveled in the previous days, not just in the numeric sense, but also with his shield mastery and overall power. So let's use this cut content to finish off episode 23 and take a look at how much Naofumi really improved. But first, this video is sponsored by Surfshark. By using surfshark.deal/Aninews, you can now get 85% off a 2-year plan plus an additional 3 free months. It's my personal go-to VPN for when I'm trying to bypass region-blocked anime on Netflix. Pro tip, try checking out Singapore and Thailand for a decent selection. But yeah, Surfshark is one of the most secure VPNs that you can use, with numerous features that go towards guaranteeing your digital security and can be used on any number of devices all at the same time. There's things like the Clean Web tool, which clears your browser of all ads, tracker, and malware. Then there's the no logs policy that works with their blind search feature to ensure that everything you do online can't be tracked. They really do make it easy to keep your sensitive data secure at all times. So if you're interested in a more secure and versatile online experience, then go ahead and check out surfshark.deal/Aninews to get that 85% discount today. Now, let's get back to the video. As we continue following Naofumi on this journey to level up quickly, we find them on their second day on the island with Lark and Therese. Naofumi was discussing levels and strategy while they sailed to the island of their choice. Currently, Naofumi was level 63, Raftalia 65, and Philo 67. It was crazy to think that Philo had already gone up 27 levels in the short time that they'd been there. But now that they were fighting with other people, a strategy needed to be considered. Though the formation Naofumi had in mind was going to be a little bit skewed. I mean, now there were just too many frontline DPS. There wasn't anyone to fill the center position where you'd usually find those who possessed a good mix of offense and defense. This was necessary so that the center could switch between the frontline and support group whenever the need arose. It was a very crucial role within this standard battle formation, so Naofumi wondered how he was going to make it work. While thinking of this, Naofumi began to imagine how this formation would even look with the other heroes. He was well aware that eventually he would have to fight with them, so he wondered how something like that would play out. Ideally, Reinet himself would be at the front with Motoyasu at the center and Itsuki at the back. The only problem with that was that Motoyasu would likely charge to the front and leave Itsuki defenseless. It was an issue Naofumi knew would have to be figured out later. Right now though, he needed to focus on the current formation. Given everyone's roles, Naofumi figured the best plan was to put himself at the front with Lark and Therese in the center and Philo and Raftalia at the back. It's the formation they went with as they ventured deeper into the island. After their initial encounter with some monsters, Lark makes a request to take some of the monster materials for himself. Naofumi assumed that it was to create some sort of potion, but to his surprise, Lark instead lowered his scythe and absorbed the monster parts in what looked to be the exact same way that his shield did. Needless to say, Naofumi was in shock. He was certain that legendary weapons were the only items capable of absorbing materials that way, and there was no way that Lark could be a hero because Naofumi was still getting XP from fighting with him. So many questions were now popping into Naofumi's head, but for now he just chalked it up to not knowing enough about the adventurers of this world. Remember, to him, Lark and Therese were just these two adventurers that he happened to stumble across. So perhaps there did in fact exist other weapons that could absorb materials. That was something that only the weapon shop owner would know. Anyway, after seeing this, Naofumi wanted to know just how strong Lark was. He decided to lead them deeper into the forest until they came across the Karma Rabbit Familia. It was a pretty similar situation to what we saw in the anime, except instead of penguins, it was rabbits. So this brings us to when Therese uses her magic to assist Naofumi. While the flames engulfed his position and purified his curse, Naofumi faintly heard an unfamiliar voice. It seemed as if it was coming from the flames around him, and from it he could barely make out the words "thank you." It's the first hint we get that Therese had a special affinity with her gems. Although it was a rare sight for Naofumi, this type of power was actually fairly common from where Therese came from. Specifically, it was the ability to combine her personal magic with the latent power of her gems. Lark's power was just as impressive as he finished off the rest of the rabbits with his scythe. Naofumi then used their corpses to unlock a new rabbit shield, and with it came the equip bonus alert range, something that was likely very similar to the sense of smell bonus he got from the dog shields. Now, while prepping to move even deeper into the island, Naofumi thought about what he just witnessed. To him, Lark looked to be just as strong as Raftalia, and his weapon displayed all sorts of different abilities. It changed forms and grew in size during various parts of the fight, almost as if Lark was using a legendary weapon himself. But surely that wasn't possible. It just wouldn't make sense. So once again, Naofumi chalked it up to his lack of knowledge. It's clear though that the novel is slowly hinting us towards the idea that something about Lark is different. Him and Therese aren't your typical adventurers, and they like to highlight that fact by showcasing their unique abilities and weapons. Anyway, eventually Naofumi would end up leading everyone into another strange Stonehenge-like area. Just like with the dogs, there was yet another mysterious sphere right in the center of it. As everyone slowly approached, the Karma Rabbit boss monster appeared as if out of nowhere, warping directly from the black sphere to the ground in front of them. It really was a massive monster. Its ears moved as if they were arms, and every time it screamed, the ground beneath them would start to erupt spikes. Similar to the dogs, smaller familias kept spawning as well, making it difficult to focus on the main boss. But having extra people to manage aggro made it a lot easier to restrict the boss's movements. Because of this, the rabbit couldn't take advantage of its agility and was quickly taken out. Now, just like how the last boss dropped the Karma Dog Claw, this one dropped the Karma Rabbit Sword. It was a much higher quality sword than what Raftalia already had. Not to mention that it also gave her increased agility and attack power in exchange for decreased magic power and defenses. So, with this being the second weapon from the Karma series, Naofumi figured that he could rely on them to increase everyone's overall power. Though without blood clean coating to keep the weapon clean, the item itself wouldn't last for very long. It was yet another issue that the weapon shop owner would have to take care of. After this, a little more time was spent leveling on that island. By the end, Naofumi was level 70, Raftalia 72, and Philo 73. However, Naofumi noticed that the rate at which they were leveling had slowed down significantly. Even though they were getting more XP and killing the same amount of monsters, they just weren't ranking up as fast as they used to. Naofumi couldn't quite figure it out, but something just didn't make sense with the way that the leveling worked here. The Earl did mention that it was practically impossible to surpass level 80, but it was as if the whole island operated differently from the rest of Melromark. Regardless, given the consistent drop in leveling efficiency, eventually a new area would have to be found to level up anyway. But that was another issue for later. Naofumi figured that he should take advantage of his time now to level up as much as he can, even if that did mean only getting to level 80. So the next day was spent doing much of the same, except now they were fighting against the penguins. Because of their now high levels, these monsters didn't pose much of a threat at all. In fact, they were actually quite boring to fight. The loot that they dropped was still pretty helpful though. From it, Naofumi was able to unlock 2 new Pengu shields, both of which increased his proficiency at swimming and fishing. An interesting thing to note is that even though Peckle's status adjustment was an ability, the Peckle animal itself was thought to have gone extinct. In fact, all the status adjustments from the Karma shields were for animals that haven't been seen in years. So it didn't really make any sense as to why they'd be part of these shields. Once again, another mystery was added to the list relating to these islands. Anyway, one of the drops that Naofumi got from these penguins was the Peckle Kigurumi, a weird-looking penguin-like costume that buffed a whole bunch of defenses and further increased his ability to swim underwater. It was actually a fairly strong piece of equipment, but the way it looked made Naofumi not ever want to fight in it. One feature in particular about it was that the size could change to fit whoever was wearing it. Even Philo's queen form was something that could wear the item as well. It would mold itself into the shape of Philo, then melt into her feathers. By the time it was finished, Philo didn't even look like a Philolial anymore. It's as if the magical effects of the item changed Philo into something other than a Philolial. The whole thing was just an absurd experience all around. Unfortunately, when Naofumi tried it on himself, the outfit didn't change nearly as much for him. The only reason he was even wearing it in the first place was because he gave his armor to Raftalia. Her equipment wasn't really holding up all that well, plus he had nothing to replace it with other than this item. So, given the sizable buff of the Kigurumi, someone was going to have to wear it for the rest of the day. That person just happened to be Naofumi. Now, while they continued their hunt throughout the islands, everything just started to get boring. The monsters were so weak now that it couldn't even be considered a battle. Even the bosses barely put up a fight anymore. At most, they could take a couple hits before going down now. They really did increase their power by quite a lot, but it still wasn't at a satisfactory level for Naofumi. Sure, the numeric levels were great, but that didn't necessarily directly translate to power. What Naofumi wanted now was to focus on unlocking more for his shield. He knew he needed to familiarize himself with his full potential if he was going to become confident in his own abilities. Mastering his shield was the true way that he was going to get stronger. It was how all the heroes were going to get stronger. Now, since they'd pretty much stopped leveling, Naofumi decided to spend the next few days resting. That's where the anime decided to sort of shoehorn in the beach scenes. Although it wasn't exactly on a beach, the topic of a glowing island at the bottom of the ocean did come up. You see, every night Naofumi would notice a faint red hue coming from the ocean. Up until now, he didn't think much of it until Philo mentioned how there was actually something down there. So Naofumi figured that he'd put his new items to use and check out what it was. As we saw, what they found was a mysterious temple with the giant dragon hourglass standing in the center. That much we already know. It's the many scenes after this that were cut out from the anime. With only 2 days left until the next wave, Naofumi quickly called for an emergency meeting of the heroes. Just as you'd expect, the other heroes found what Naofumi was saying very difficult to believe. But surprisingly, they didn't think he was lying. Instead, Itsuki just figured that it wasn't their problem. At first, he simply wanted to ignore it. Sure, they could evacuate the islands and let the monsters overrun it, but that was the lazy way. And Naofumi thought for sure that that would make Vittoria want to kill him. So Naofumi framed the situation in a way that would make it seem appealing to the other heroes, mentioning how it was a good chance to test out their new power. This worked on both Itsuki and Motoyasu, but Ren didn't seem too interested. It was actually rather odd for him to be backing down from a fight like this. He didn't outright say that he didn't want to be involved, but his lack of words made it very clear. So as Ren was about to leave, Naofumi grabbed hold of his arm to stop him. Ren tried to wriggle his way out, but Naofumi wouldn't let go. As Ren became more agitated, it only went to make the others more curious as to why he was acting this way. That's when they finally pieced together that Ren was afraid of the ocean. He didn't know how to swim. It's the only reason why he'd be backing down from a fight like this. Of course, Ren vehemently denied this. I mean, he always liked to play the calm and collected character. Surely he didn't want to ruin that image by being embarrassed by something as silly as not being able to swim. So, to both verify their suspicions and confirm that the wave was actually coming, Naofumi and Motoyasu dragged Ren out to the docks to go and see the temple. But just to make sure that Ren could swim first, they pushed him into the water. The water itself wasn't very deep. It was 4 feet at the most, so nothing that was really too dangerous for anyone. But when Ren went under, he didn't come back up. He literally just let himself start to drown in water that he could have stood up in. Overall, it made for quite the comedic scene. Naofumi then went on to further discuss his strategy. He took the lead as if he was already familiar with commanding others. The thing is, that wasn't entirely false. If you remember episode 1, it wasn't necessarily wrong to consider Naofumi an otaku. He wasn't a hardcore leveler or a min-maxer, but what he did have was quite a bit of knowledge about event battles and MMOs. In fact, Naofumi loved to make his own guilds and teams. He would recruit all sorts of players and plan out how to approach events similar to the waves. The planning phase was by all means one of Naofumi's favorite parts of online games, so it seemed like that experience was going to come in handy here. On the other hand, even though Motoyasu says he had similar experience, he was more like the type of guy who would let the other players figure out everything for him. Besides, anything Motoyasu had done in the past couldn't really compare to Naofumi's establishment of a top 3 guild in a server. That's why Naofumi seemed to have quite a bit of tactical knowledge. It's also how he was able to save all the villagers during the previous wave. You see, to Naofumi, equipment and levels could only get you so far. What the truly powerful needed most was an instinct for command, and alongside that came an appreciation for diplomacy. This was easier said than done though. Naofumi knew that this wasn't like his video games. Even if formations were formed under his command, he'd still have to deal with more things like offensive pushes, defensive holds, and potential retreats. There was also no guarantee that the soldiers under his command would follow his orders to the T either. And most importantly, there was no set of guidelines or rules that governed how the situation would play out like in video games. Literally anything was possible, both in the way that the wave can be handled and how it can play out. So there were far more possibilities here than there ever would be in a video game. All this led Naofumi to the conclusion that he needed to ask for reinforcements from Melromark. He would use his shield's formation function to get the queen and her armies to participate in the battle. At least with her guidance they could approach this battle with a more appropriate method. Still though, Naofumi and the others would have to be the central players. It was always going to be their job to lead the charge and open up a path that the soldiers could follow. Now, with all that being sorted out, the other heroes made their way to the temple. Naofumi gave Ren his kigurumi so that he could swim there. It's after this that we find out that there were other variations to this suit as well, drops that were received from the other bosses. But unlike Naofumi, who got 3 for repeatedly slaying the same boss, the others only managed to pick up 1. They actually found the boss monsters to be rather difficult. This was news that Naofumi didn't really want to hear right now, but it did highlight the fact that Naofumi's current power level now greatly outscaled the other heroes. Perhaps not with his own power directly, but definitely as a team with Raphtalia and Philo. As they were now, they could very easily take on all 3 of the heroes. Anyway, after confirming the existence of the Hourglass, that's when the real preparation started to begin. Naofumi had hoped that some actual commanders would be able to assist on the front line, but since they were on a remote island, all they really had at their disposal was a few local sailors. Not to mention, it was going to be difficult for the Queen to prep all the necessary boats and troops in such a short period of time. So, in the end, the best course of action was to use the Dragon Hourglass Sand Shield to teleport back to the castle. That way, the Queen and her troops could be registered under Naofumi's formation and be teleported alongside him when the wave began. So, when activating the teleportation skill, the shield allowed Naofumi to access certain locations from his memories, one of which was the Melromark summoning room. It also presented the option to choose who he wanted to be teleported alongside him, proving itself to make for quite the versatile ability. After confirming his selections, Naofumi found himself to be instantly teleported to the very first room he arrived in, and since the Queen was already expecting him, they had no trouble getting everything set up. The Queen had even prepared a whole warehouse full of materials as per Naofumi's request. As you may recall, right after Naofumi figured out the new features of his shield, he went and asked the Queen to gather all sorts of materials for him. This allowed him to upgrade and awaken both the Soul Eater and Wrath shield. Up until now, his Chimera Viper shield was by far the strongest, but now that he had these, his defense was now 4 times higher and he unlocked many new special effects, some of which were Wall Escape and Undead Control. Wall Escape let Naofumi phase through a single wall in exchange for all of his SP points, so really it was only useful as a last resort escape plan. Then Undead Control did pretty much what the name states. All in all, these were pretty good upgrades to have for the wave. Now all that was left was to finish up the preparations with the Queen and her soldiers. So this pretty much brings us to when the wave is about to start in episode 24, which I'll talk about in the next cut content. But until then, feel free to check out some Tower of God or ReZero content as well. Now, before I go, I'd like to thank Surfshark once again for sponsoring this video. If you're looking for a highly reliable and secure VPN, then go ahead and use surfshark.deal/Aninews to get 85% off that 2-year plan today. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!